Prologue. The world on the edge. Imagine a world without GPS, without antibiotics, without any concept of human rights. A world where the average life expectancy is 40 years, where drought means famine and plague means the end of a village. A world where the only answer to the question, "Why do I feel so terrible?" is simply, God is testing you. This is the end of the 11th century. Europe is a patchwork quilt of hundreds of tiny kingdoms, duchies, and counties where knights fight each other for the right to a scrap of land. The Pope tries to keep it all under control, but he's not doing a good job. The Church forbids fighting on Sundays, forbids attacking pilgrims, forbids killing peasants. The knights nod and do all of it the very next day. And in the east, a gathering storm. The Seljuk Turks, a new power in the Islamic world, crushed the Byzantine Empire at Manzikert in 1071. They seized Asia Minor, which had been the heart of Byzantium for 7 centuries. They reached Jerusalem. Christian pilgrims who had been traveling to the Holy Sepulchre for centuries began returning with tales of humiliation, extortion, and violence. The world was ready to explode. All it needed was a spark. It was a movement born of fear, hope, greed, and faith. And all 4 emotions were completely sincere. Chapter 1. The Speech That Changed History. November 27th, 1095. The city of Clermont in central France. On a vast field outside the city walls, thousands of people have gathered, bishops, knights, abbots, common folk. Autumn, cold, but no one leaves. An elderly man in white robes ascends the platform, Pope Urban II. He has been holding a church council for several days, tedious negotiations about the appointment of bishops and church reform. But today will be different. Urban begins to speak. And the further he goes, the quieter the crowd becomes. He talks about Christians in the East being killed and enslaved, about the Turks defiling holy places, about Jerusalem, the city of Christ, groaning under the rule of the infidels. His words pour out like molten metal, hot, heavy, searing. Historical fact. The exact text of Urban's speech has not survived, only eyewitness accounts written down years later. They all differ slightly. What exactly he said, we don't know. But what happened afterwards, we know for certain. The climax of the speech. Urban calls upon the knights to turn their weapons not against their Christian brothers, but against the enemies of the Lord. To go to the east, to liberate the Holy Sepulchre, and for those who fall on this journey, a full remission of sins. The crowd is silent for a second. Then, an explosion. Thousands of voices cry out the same thing at once. Deus lo volt! Deus lo volt! God wills it. God wills it. Urban raises his hand. Silence. He says, "Let these words be your battle cry." And within minutes, knights are sewing crosses of red cloth onto their shoulders, the symbol of their vow. Hence, Crusaders. What drove Urban himself? Historians still debate. Sincere religious feeling, undoubtedly, but also political calculation. Likewise, Constantinople was asking for help. The Pope wanted to unite the fractured church. wanted to give European knighthood an outlet for its unbridled aggression, wanted to elevate Rome's authority over the Eastern Church. Great events never have a single cause. Chapter 2. Peter the Hermit and the People's Crusade. While the knights were preparing for the campaign, polishing armor, hiring squires, arranging for the management of their estates in their absence, something completely unforeseen happened. Peter the Hermit appeared, a small, scrawny monk from Picardy. They say he walked barefoot even in winter, ate only fish and wine, slept on the bare ground. By appearance, a tramp. By power of persuasion, a true demon of oratory. Peter began preaching throughout France and Germany even before the official launch of the crusade, or immediately after. He went from village to village and told the common people, "The Lord is calling you, not the knights in armor, you, simple plowmen, blacksmiths, widows, children." And the people followed him. By the spring of 1096, a crowd of 20,000, and by some accounts 40,000, was moving behind Peter. It was a monstrous spectacle. Almost unarmed, almost without food, without maps, without commanders, without military discipline. Peasants with scythes, women with children in their arms, old men who could barely walk, teenagers who had never held a sword. Historical context: 1095 to 1096 were years of famine in Europe. Many of these people marched not only out of faith, but because at home they faced death from poverty. Jerusalem was not just a holy city for them, it was a promise of a better life, or at least an honorable death. They set out for the east, and almost immediately, they started killing. Not Muslims, the Muslims were still far away. On their way through Germany, the mob began attacking Jewish communities. The logic was simple and horrific. Why go far away to fight the infidels when the infidels live right next door? In Worms, Mainz, Cologne, Trier, mass killings. Thousands of Jews perished even before the crusade reached Asia Minor. Local bishops tried to protect the Jews, hid them in their palaces, but the mob could not be stopped. This is the first terrible truth about the First Crusade, usually mentioned only in passing. Struggling to reach Constantinople, the People's Crusade, as historians later called it, received a cold welcome. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos looked at this horde with horror. He had asked for military aid, but not this. Not starving madmen who looted the surrounding villages in the first days of their arrival. Alexios quickly ferried the mob across the Bosporus, to the other shore, into Asia Minor, away from his capital. There, the Seljuks were waiting for them. In October 1096 at Civitald, the Turkish army carried out a real massacre. Almost the entire crowd was destroyed or captured within a few hours. Peter the Hermit survived. He was in Constantinople at the time. He returned to where he had miraculously not perished along with the rest. The People's Crusade was over, without ever truly beginning. But the real Crusaders were already on their way.
Chapter 3. The Knights, the real ones. Autumn 1096. 4 separate armies are moving towards Constantinople from different corners of Europe. No overall command, no common plan. Only a common goal and a common cross on the cloak. Who are these people? Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine. Calm, devout, almost ascetic. He sold and mortgaged all his property to equip his army. Not the most brilliant commander, but a man of iron reputation. He was respected by all, crusaders and enemies alike. Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman prince from southern Italy. Now this is a real star. A handsome giant, they say nearly 2 meters tall, blonde, charismatic, cunning as a fox and brave as a lion. He had already fought against Alexios Komnenos. They were enemies. He joined the crusade not only out of religious fervor, but because he sensed the chance to carve out his own principality in the east. And he was not wrong. Raymond IV of Toulouse, the richest of the leaders. Elderly, with an eye knocked out in his youth, tedious and ambitious. He considered himself the chief. Almost no one agreed with him. This created constant friction. Tancred, Robert of Normandy, Stephen of Blois, and dozens of other knights of lesser rank. Each with his own retinue, each with personal ambitions, each with a burning faith that was strangely intertwined with a thirst for plunder. Numbers. The total strength of the Crusader armies that reached Constantinople was about 35 to 40,000 people, of which roughly 5 to 7,000 were mounted knights. The rest were infantry, servants, wagon train, pilgrims, women. A huge, unwieldy, polyglot mass. When these armies began arriving in Constantinople, Alexios Komnenos again had a headache. Only now, even more serious. These men were armed, disciplined, and dangerous. Alexios wanted to use the Crusaders as mercenaries, to reconquer Asia Minor from the Turks and return it to Byzantium. The Crusaders wanted to go straight to Jerusalem. Their interests were in absolute conflict. Difficult negotiations began. Alexios used the entire arsenal of diplomacy: threats, gifts, flattery, delaying supplies. In the end, each of the leaders swore him a vassal's oath. Conquered lands that had formerly been Byzantine would be returned to Constantinople. Almost none of them would keep that vassal's oath. Bohemond, most likely, never intended to keep it from the start. Chapter 4. Nicaea, the First Victory. May 10, 97. The Crusaders cross the Bosporus and stand before the walls of Nicaea, the capital of the Sultanate of Rome. The family of the Seljuk Sultan, Kilij Arslan, lives here. The Sultan himself, with his main forces, is at this time fighting far to the east. Learning of the Crusaders, he turns around and races back. Too late. Kilij Arslan underestimated the threat. He thought this was just another horde, like the one destroyed at Civitot. He didn't even have time to get his army back to Nicaea before the Crusaders had surrounded the city on all sides. The siege of Nicaea lasted nearly a month. The Turkish garrison held out. The walls were high, supplies sufficient. One problem: the city stood on the shore of Lake Ascanios, and from the water it was open to resupply. The Crusaders solved this problem with unexpected ingenuity. They asked Alexios to send a fleet. He did. The ships were dragged on rollers over a hill, straight to the lakeshore. Nicaea was under full blockade. But the end of the siege proved disappointing for the Crusaders. Alexios conducted secret negotiations with the garrison directly. When the Turks decided to surrender, they surrendered not to the Crusaders, but to the Byzantines. At night, they opened the gates to a Greek detachment. In the morning, the Crusaders saw not their own crosses flying over the walls of Nicaea, but the flags of Constantinople. They never entered Nicaea. Alexios did not allow them to loot the city. This was the first crack between the allies. But they had to keep moving. Ahead, hundreds of kilometers of scorching Anatolian steppe, and Kilij Arslan with an army ready for revenge. Chapter 5. Dorylaeum, The battle won by luck. July 1st, 1097. Dawn over the river valley near Dorylaeum. The Crusader vanguard under Bohemond moves ahead of the main force. They have split up to make it easier to feed the army on the march. And then, from behind the hills, the army of Kilij Arslan emerges. Thousands of Turkish horse archers. They do not engage in melee. They circle, showering the dense Crusader formation with clouds of arrows. Horses fall. The knights, unaccustomed to such tactics, are furious. There is no one to fight, no one to strike with a sword, while the arrows rain down without pause. Bohemond makes the only correct decision. He orders the formation to hold and sends messengers to the main army. He takes his place in the center and holds. Several hours under continuous bombardment. This required superhuman self-control. Finally, the main army arrives. Godfrey of Bouillon leads it from a flanking direction the Turks did not expect. A charge of fresh, heavy cavalry into the unprotected flank, and the Seljuk army scatters. Kilij Arslan flees, abandoning his camp with its treasury, family, and possessions. Tactical revolution. The Battle of Dorylaeum demonstrated the fundamental difference in styles of warfare. Turkish light cavalry versus European heavy cavalry and infantry. Both sides learned from the enemy. The Crusaders began to respect horse archers. The Turks, the heavy knightly charge. The road through Asia Minor is open. But what lies ahead will nearly kill the campaign before it. Chapter 6. Hell on the March. Summer and autumn of 1097. The Crusaders march through Asia Minor. It nearly kills them all. Kilij Arslan used scorched earth tactics. As they withdrew, the Turks destroyed everything. They burned fields, filled in wells, drove off livestock. The Crusaders marched across a desert in the height of summer heat, without water, without food, under constant raids by light cavalry. People died by the thousands, not in battle, from thirst and starvation. Horses dropped dead, and knights had to go on foot or ride oxen. The oxen died too. Dogs and pigs hauled bundles instead of pack animals. This is not a metaphor, but an actual account from the chroniclers. Women cut off their hair to better endure the heat. People drank their own urine. Knights in steel armor under the Anatolian sun. It was torture. The chronicler Fulcher of Chartres writes, "Many of our people died of hunger. We ate the horses of ours that had died of hunger or exhaustion. As for the poor, their deaths are beyond counting." By the autumn of 1097, the army reached Antioch, the second most important city of the Christian East, where they would endure one of the most grueling and dramatic sieges in history. But along the way, another important episode occurred, one that few people know about. Chapter 7. Baldwin and the Adventure in Edessa. While the main army was marching toward Antioch, one of the leaders, Baldwin of Boulogne, the younger brother of Godfrey, decided to seize the moment for his own ends. The Armenian Christian state of Edessa in eastern Syria found itself in a difficult position. The elderly Armenian ruler Thoros was in need of military protection. He turned to Baldwin. Baldwin arrived with a small detachment and quickly sized up the situation. What followed was an almost comical ceremony of adoption. According to Armenian custom, to seal the alliance, Thoros adopted Baldwin. Literally, the grown man in armor crawled under the old ruler's shirt, pressing skin to skin like an infant. Thoros's wife performed the same ritual with Baldwin's wife. A few weeks later, Thoros was killed by rebellious townspeople, officially by accident. According to many historians, however, the new son was not entirely uninvolved. Baldwin became the ruler of Edessa. This was the first Crusader state, established even before the capture of Jerusalem. Important context. Baldwin I would eventually become the first king of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. His career is a perfect example of how the Crusade was simultaneously a religious movement and the biggest real estate speculation of the Middle Ages. Chapter 8. Antioch. 8 months of hell. October 1097. The Crusaders approach Antioch. The city is enormous. Its walls stretch for several kilometers, climbing the slopes of Mount Silpius. 400 towers. A garrison commanded by an experienced warrior, Yagi-Cian. Supplies for a year ahead. Walls that could withstand a far more powerful assault. The Crusaders begin the siege. They lack enough men to fully encircle the city. There is always an unsealed gap through which the defenders receive reinforcements and provisions. A strange war begins. The besiegers themselves suffer from hunger almost as much as the besieged. Winter of 1097 to 1098. Famine becomes catastrophic. Chroniclers write that people eat saddle leather, tree leaves, rats. Several knights flee the camp, back to Europe. One of them is Stephen of Blois, a count whose letters home to his wife have survived and become a crucial source on the campaign. He fled after writing to his wife that everything was wonderful and that he would return in a few weeks. He would later be forced to go back and die on the next crusade. The number of deserters grows. Peter the Hermit, that same man, also tries to flee. He is caught, brought back, and swears to stay. The Crusader army dwindles. Of the 35,000 to 40,000 men by spring 1098, estimates place the remaining force between 15,000 and 25,000. 1/3 perished without ever seeing Jerusalem. Then, the unbelievable happened. Bohemond established secret contact with one of the garrison commanders, an Armenian named Firuz, who had converted to Islam. Firuz harbored personal grievances against Emir Yagi-Cian. He was ready to open the gates. Bohemond set a condition. Antioch would go to him. He, not Raymond of Toulouse, not Godfrey, he would become the city's ruler. The other leaders reluctantly agreed. If he could take the city, let him have it. Night of June 2nd, 1098. Several dozen Crusader soldiers quietly descended on ropes to the wall controlled by Firuz and climbed up. They killed the guards, opened the gates. Antioch had fallen. What followed was a bloodbath. The Crusaders killed indiscriminately. Muslims, Jews, even Christians they could not quickly identify. Yagi-Cian tried to flee and was killed by Armenian peasants near the city. But the triumph lasted exactly 1 day. Chapter 8. Antioch. 8 months of hell. October 1097. The Crusaders approach Antioch. The city is enormous. Its walls stretch for several kilometers, climbing up the slopes of Mount Silpius. 400 towers. A garrison commanded by the seasoned warrior Yagi-Cian. Supplies for a year ahead. Walls that could withstand a far more powerful assault. The Crusaders begin the siege. They lack enough men to fully encircle the city. There always remains an unblocked section through which the defenders receive reinforcements and food. A strange war begins. The besiegers suffer from hunger almost as much as the besieged. Winter of 1097 to 1098. Famine becomes catastrophic. Chroniclers write that people eat saddle leather, tree leaves, rats. Several knights flee the camp, back to Europe. One of them is Stephen of Blois, a count whose letters home to his wife have survived and become a crucial source on the campaign. He fled, writing to his wife that everything was fine and that he would return in a few weeks. Later, he was forced to go back and died on the next crusade. The number of deserters grows. Peter the Hermit, the very same, also tries to flee. He is caught, brought back, and swears to stay. The Crusader army melts away. Out of 35,000 to 40,000 people, by the spring of 1098, estimates place the remaining force at 15,000 to 25,000. 1/3 have died without ever seeing Jerusalem. Then, the unbelievable happened. Bohemond establishes secret contact with one of the garrison commanders, an Armenian named Firuz, who had converted to Islam. Firuz holds personal grievances against Emir Yagisian. He is ready to open the gates. Bohemond sets a condition. Antioch will be his. He, not Raymond of Toulouse, not Godfrey, he becomes the city's ruler. The other leaders reluctantly agree. If he takes the city, let him have it. Night of June 2nd, 1098. Several dozen Crusader warriors quietly descend by rope to the section of the wall controlled by Firuz and climb up. They kill the guards. Open the gates. Antioch has fallen. What follows is a bloodbath. The Crusaders kill indiscriminately. Muslims, Jews, and even Christians they cannot quickly identify. Yagisian tries to flee and is killed by Armenian peasants near the city. But the triumph lasts exactly 1 day.
Chapter 9.
The Trap. The besieged besiege. June 3rd, 1098. The day after the capture of Antioch, a massive army approached the city. Kerboga, the Atabeg of Mosul. 50,000 warriors, by the chronicler's estimates. The real number was probably smaller, but still overwhelming. The Crusaders were trapped. They had taken Antioch and immediately found themselves under siege themselves. They were too exhausted, too hungry, and too few to hold the entire perimeter. The city's supplies had already been eaten away over 8 months. There was almost no hope of rescue. The army's morale collapsed. And then something happened that saved the Crusaders, or doomed them, depending on how you look at it. An ordinary member of the expedition, a Provençal peasant named Peter Bartholomew, announced that he had seen a vision of the Apostle Andrew. The apostle showed him a spot in Antioch's Church of St. Peter where the Holy Lance was supposedly buried. The very lance with which a Roman soldier pierced Christ's side on the cross. The higher clergy were skeptical. The apostolic legate, Adhemar of Le Puy, called it outright fraud. But Raymond of Toulouse believed, or pretended to believe. That was politics. They began to dig. They dug all day. Nothing was found. Then Peter Bartholomew jumped into the pit himself, and a few minutes later triumphantly raised a rusty iron rod. Did he believe it himself? Had he buried it himself? Had he merely stumbled upon some old spearhead? We don't know. But what happened next is real. The Holy Lance passed through the Crusader ranks. People wept, kissed the relic, prayed. The tired, hungry, desperate soldiers suddenly felt something new. Hope. A mad decision was made, not to wait for help, not to negotiate with Kerboga, but to march out of the city and attack an army several times larger. June 28, 1098. The Crusaders marched out of the gates of Antioch. By various estimates, they had between 10 and 15,000 combat-ready warriors against Kerboga's army. Kerboga made a strategic mistake. He let the entire Crusader army exit the gates, calculating that it would be easier to destroy them in the open field rather than fight a bloody crush at the gates. This gave the Crusaders time to form battle lines. And then, a fire broke out behind Kerboga's army. One of the detachments set the grass ablaze. The flames and smoke blew straight into the Seljuks' faces. Moreover, Kerboga's army was a coalition of different rulers with different interests. When the battle turned against them, several emirs simply withdrew with their troops. Panic spread instantly. Kerboga's army, the 50,000-strong force that was supposed to annihilate the Crusaders, fled. It was a true miracle, or military genius, or incredible luck. Probably all three at once.
Chapter 10. Ma'arat al-Numan, the darkest hour.
After the victory at Antioch, the army stalled once again. Raymond of Toulouse and Bohemond could not agree on who should control the city. Arguments dragged on month after month. The knights stood idle. The common pilgrims began to grumble. November 10, 98. An attempt to take the city of Ma'arat al-Numan in northern Syria. The first assault was repelled. The Crusaders laid siege to the city. The siege lasted several weeks. In December, they took the city by storm. It is here that the chronicles record something most popular historical accounts prefer to gloss over. At Ma'arat, the Crusaders committed a massacre of the civilian population. Then, in the grip of extreme famine, they resorted to cannibalism. This is not anti-Crusader propaganda. It is documented by several chroniclers, including those sympathetic to the Crusaders. Radulf of Caen writes, "Our people boiled adult unbelievers in cauldrons, impaled children on spits, and ate them roasted." Pope Urban II, upon hearing the news, was horrified. The Patriarch of Antioch tried to stop it. In vain. The Crusade was not a chivalric romance. It is the story of people driven by hunger, fear, and religious frenzy to the very edge of humanity. News of this spread across the entire Middle East. The cities the Crusaders passed through preferred to surrender without a fight. The common pilgrims could wait no longer. They began to set fire to the fortifications of Ma'arat themselves, demanding that the army press forward. Raymond of Toulouse, weary of arguing with Bohemond, ceded Antioch to his rival, left the city barefoot as a pilgrim, and led the army onward to Jerusalem.
Chapter 11. The Road to the Holy City.
Early 1099. The army moves south along the Syrian coast. It is no longer the same army that had left Europe. Exhausted, reduced to a third of its size, accustomed to death. But stubborn, with the fierce, seared into their souls stubbornness of people who have come too far to stop. A curious detail: while passing through the territories of coastal cities, the Crusaders often concluded peace treaties with the local Muslim rulers. They did not need new sieges. They needed Jerusalem. By this time, Jerusalem belonged to the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt, not the Seljuks. The Fatimids had driven the Seljuks out of the city shortly before the Crusaders' arrival. At first, they even negotiated with the Crusaders. The Egyptians offered them free access for pilgrims in exchange for neutrality. The negotiations reached an impasse. The Crusaders wanted the city, not permission to visit. The garrison of Jerusalem was not very large. It was commanded by a governor named Iftikhar ad-Dawla. He had managed to expel the Christian population from the city so as not to have a potential fifth column. He filled in or poisoned the wells around the city. He prepared for the siege. On June 7, 1099, the Crusader army, about 12,000 combat-ready warriors, reached the walls of Jerusalem. Many wept. After 3 years on the road, here it was.
Chapter 12. Jerusalem. The Siege. Jerusalem in 1099 was a large, well-fortified city. Powerful walls, a well-armed garrison. Iftikhar ad-Dawla knew that help would come from Egypt. He only needed to hold out. The Crusaders tried to take the city by direct assault on June 13th. It didn't work. The ladders were too short, the walls were too high, They were thrown back with losses. And then the nightmare with water began again. There were almost no springs in the vicinity. The June heat in Judea was merciless. People were dying of thirst. Once more. Then help arrived from an unexpected direction. Several Genoese and English ships reached Jaffa with supplies and, more importantly, with carpenters and engineers. And in the forests of Samaria, there was enough timber to build siege engines. Over the next few weeks, the Crusaders built siege towers, huge wooden structures on wheels as tall as the city walls, capable of dropping an assault bridge right onto the battlements. They were built from ships dismantled plank by plank, trees from distant forests, anything that could be found. Meanwhile, the Egyptian army was marching north. They had to hurry. An omen. On July 8, 1099, the Crusaders performed a solemn procession around the walls of Jerusalem, barefoot, with prayers. Exactly as Joshua had once marched around Jericho. The defenders stood on the walls and laughed.
Chapter 13. July 15th, 1099. The Assault. The night of July 13th to 14th, the Crusaders begin their final preparations. Siege towers are rolled up to the walls. It is hard work, digging ditches, laying logs so the wheels don't get stuck in the ground, moving huge structures under enemy fire. The defenders set the towers on fire. The Crusaders put out the fires. July 14th, the first day of the assault. Fierce fighting all day, no breakthrough. Godfrey of Bouillon's tower near the northern wall almost reaches its goal, but not quite. July 15th, 1099. Friday. Exactly at the hour when, according to church calculations, Christ died on the cross. Godfrey's tower draws right up to the wall. An assault bridge is thrown across. Two knights, Lutold and Engelbert of Tournai, are the first to step onto the wall. Behind them, a flood. That's it. They are inside. From other sides, the gates begin to open. Raymond enters through the southern gate. The garrison flees to the citadel. Iftikhar ad-Dawla surrenders personally to Raymond in exchange for a guarantee of life for himself and his guards. Raymond will keep his word. This is one of the rare bright moments of that day, because what was happening in the city at the same time was monstrous. Chapter 14. The Massacre. The Crusaders entered Jerusalem, and the massacre began. They killed everyone. Muslims, Jews who had locked themselves in a synagogue. The synagogue was set on fire. People trying to surrender, people trying to flee, those hiding on rooftops and on the Temple Mount. The chroniclers, and these were the Crusaders themselves, proud of their victory, describe blood ankle-deep in the streets. Later extravagant accounts, blood up to the horses' stirrups, are an exaggeration. But what happened, even without poetic exaggeration, was a mass killing. The number of victims in Jerusalem is a matter of debate among historians. The lowest estimates are several thousand. The highest, tens of thousands. The city's population was small after the Christians had been expelled, but enough Muslims and Jews remained. Raymond of Aguirre, chaplain to Raymond of Toulouse and an eyewitness, writes, "In the porticos and the Temple of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees and bridle reins. It was a just and wonderful judgment of God." Godfrey of Bouillon took off his armor, and barefoot, in just his shirt, went to pray at the Holy Sepulchre. He wept. He had just taken the city for which he had marched for 3 years, for which thousands of his men had died. For him,
This was a genuine religious experience. This is one of the most terrible things in this story. Not cynicism, sincerity.
Chapter 15. Ascalon, the final battle. Jerusalem has been taken, but the Egyptian army, the very one they had so feared, is already drawing near. Before they can catch their breath, the Crusaders march out again. On August 12, 1099, near Ascalon, they meet the army of Vizier al-Afdal. It would have been a complete rout for the Crusaders, if not for one detail. The Egyptian army had not had time to form its battle lines. The Crusaders attacked swiftly, and what was meant to be Egypt's decisive counterattack turned into a panicked retreat. Al-Afdal fled to Ascalon. He abandoned his camp, his treasury, his supplies. The crusade was completed. Jerusalem remained in Crusader hands. And what became of the leaders? Godfrey of Bouillon refused the royal title. He would not wear a golden crown where Christ had worn a crown of thorns. He became the defender of the Holy Sepulchre. He died just 1 year later, in July 1100. Bohemond received the Principality of Antioch and was soon captured by the Turks. Raymond of Toulouse never got Jerusalem. He died in 1105, never having reconciled with his rivals. Peter the Hermit lived until 1115 and founded a monastery in Flanders. Epilogue. What was that? More than 900 years have passed. What was the First Crusade? That depends on who you are and where you stand. For a medieval Christian, it was a true miracle. A handful of exhausted people against the great powers of the East. A victory against all logic. God truly willed it. For a historian, it was a clash of several historical processes. Demographic pressure in Europe, the crisis of Seljuk power, the schism in the Islamic world between the Sunnis of Baghdad and the Shiite Fatimids of Egypt, which is why no one came to defend Jerusalem in time. The Seljuks and the Egyptians hated each other more than they hated the Crusaders. The ambitions of Byzantium, the commercial interests of Genoa and Venice. For the inhabitants of the Middle East, it was the beginning of nearly 2 centuries of violence that left a deep scar on the region's collective memory. Arab chronicles long called the Crusaders simply Franks, not understanding what they were. Then they understood. The Crusades became a symbol of Western aggression that persists in the Middle East to this day. For the Jews, it was the beginning of a wave of pogroms that swept across Europe and left thousands dead, even before the crusade reached its goal. The First Crusade is a story of how the strongest and most sincere human feelings, faith, hope, love of neighbor, can become a source of monstrous violence. That does not make those feelings false. It makes people human. The Kingdom of Jerusalem will last less than 100 years. In 1187, Saladin will take Jerusalem back, and he will do it in the exact opposite manner, without massacre, with guarantees for the civilian population, with ransom for those who cannot pay for their own freedom. That, too, is part of this story. New crusades will begin. The second, the third, the famous one, with Richard the Lionheart against Saladin. The fourth, when the Crusaders sacked Constantinople instead of Jerusalem. The fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, increasingly senseless, increasingly cruel, increasingly unsuccessful. But the first was special, because it still had that mad, burning, sincere feeling that made tens of thousands of people abandon everything and walk halfway across the world. Whether it was called faith, madness, a thirst for adventure, or a thirst for land, each person had their own reason. And in that lies the whole truth about this story, and about people in general.